Thanks everybody for coming to lecture number 2 in the 3rd year that we've done Hempology 101 lectures at the University of Victoria. My name is Ted Smith. I'm the president of the International Hempology 101 Society. I'm not actually a student here, but I'm happy to be here teaching this free public lecture series to students and everyone else that can find their way here, and welcome to those online as well. For those who didn't hear last week, anyone who attends physically or online all of the lectures, or if you miss one or two with sickness or something, that can be excused. But we have certificates that we give to people, certificates of completion, I think we've called them. And so there's some handouts there, guys, and you can yeah, thanks for getting the door too. Well, I was just saying, if you sign up and come every week, you end up getting a certificate from Hempology at the end of the semester. Yeah. So, right on, thanks. So, I think I'm just going to jump right into today's topic, which is the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act of the United States. And so there's a certain amount to talk about when it comes to the actual law itself, but there really is a lot of talk that needs to be done leading into it, because you really can't understand the Marijuana Tax Act without understanding all of the different forces, you could say, that were behind that. Because really, to just look at the Marijuana Tax Act in and of itself, it doesn't really make any sense in some ways, but again, if you understand the history, it is really helpful. So I talked last week about the history of cannabis, and talked a little bit about some of the uses of industrial hemp. So I just realized there's a quote that I'm going to want to use, so I'm looking that up. But there's a significant number of historical uses of hemp, and I'm going to show some of them throughout here to give you a sense of how widespread it was. And I pulled this picture off to show, in a way, how tied into America's history the hemp plant actually is. Because one of the images that you may see or know of, like the early settlers of America, is their wagons that they rode across the West to settle the West in. Well, those wagons were all made with canvas, which is cannabis, hemp. That was the root term. It comes mostly from the Netherlands, where the Dutch actually were able to create and establish their international trade based in part on the shipping industry. They were growing hemp and had a lot of mills in the 1800s, 1700s that was producing a lot of canvas, and many navies basically sank or swam depending on how good of a supply of hemp they had, because hemp was used not just for the canvas and all the sails, but in all the rope and those two uses of hemp were really hard to replace in the open sea, because most other rope and cloth would rip or shred quite easily, and you couldn't really have a very good army if all of your equipment was falling apart all the time. And so there was certain wars. When we do a class on hemp history, you'll find out that Napoleon actually invaded Russia to burn down their hemp fields, so that the British army didn't have any more hemp, and so the British started to tax the American colonies even more and try to get them to grow more hemp, which is partly why the Americans revolted. And there's all sorts of like I say, historical interplays between the use of hemp and wars even. But certainly as an economy, growing hemp and making things from it in the 1800s was incredibly important, not only to established European colonizers who are trying to build navies to take over other countries, but certainly in America as well. Both at first they grew as much hemp as they could for the motherland, and then after the American Revolution, they grew as much as possible for their own use. But really, in some ways, also the Civil War in the United States, and this kind of comes up throughout the lecture. Also, you might think of represented the industrialist North against the agriculturally based economies of the South. And it wasn't split exactly like that, but certainly after the Civil War, the large guilds and corporations of New York City had much more influence than the defeated southern cotton farmers and those who had led the Civil War in the South. And so that conflict comes up in several ways when you're looking at the history of why hemp became illegal. So because cotton was competing with hemp, right? And so the only reason that it was competing with hemp, though, was because they were using slaves. So they weren't paying them any kind of a wage at all. Whereas most hemp farmers, certainly in Europe and stuff, like there were serfs and different things, so there was slavery everywhere, don't get me wrong. But the American cotton farmers really built up their entire empire on slavery. And when that was taken away, cotton became a lot more expensive to produce. And so the economies of scale meant that actually hemp production was better for farmers. So cotton farmers were hurting, not just having lost the war, but economically as well. Cotton's very labor intensive, but not quite as much as hemp. Just to give you a sense of all the different major commercial plants of the early 1900s and even late 1800s, like I say, there was cotton was in there, and I believe this saccharine was also used for fiber. But hemp is right up there with flax as well is a major competitor. Not all of these were competing with hemp in various ways, but certainly if you look back at any other drawings or illustrations of the time period, you will see hemp just included. Just like all the other plants of the day and age, there was no association with a drug or anything like that at all at the time. Although cannabis, indica or hashish were certainly well known of at the time. I'm going to quote from the American Medical Association, who protested the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act because while hemp was being used at the same time, cannabis extracts in particular were being used by the medical industry. It's a whole other topic, but for example, Queen Victoria used cannabis tinctures to deal with their menstrual cramps as advised by her doctor in the 1800s. So there's a lot of historical documentation of the use of cannabis as a medicine, and at the same time, certainly of hemp in a number of uses. Now, I've mentioned canvas, really that would have been the main use, although rope production as well, you should not be underestimated in any way, shape, or form. Hemp lasts a lot better in the cold and in the salt water and lasts for years longer than other substitutes. So those were some of the earlier competitors with hemp. But it grew from there, as a good term, as the potential for hemp became greater. One of the problems with hemp was it was very labor intensive. So the fibers, they're really strong, but it was impossible for them to make machinery really before 1916 that could essentially harvest the plant in the field. They were trying to make combines and mowers basically that would cut the plant down and have it ready for processing. The problem is that you got these fibers on the outside of the plant that are really strong, and then in the middle you've got this cork-like material called the herds. Historically, it would be broken up. Either you'd cut it down, leave it on the ground, and then you would take the plant and just smash it, and the herds would separate from the fiber. Or it would have to what they call ret, which is sort of a nice term for rot, because it doesn't rot, it sort of changes its chemical makeup, but it just separates the fiber from the herd. And so traditionally these were done often by people just like cutting down the plant. You could submerge it in